Thank you so much, Liz, for being here today on Chompcast. We're really excited to get to talk to you about your career, about your experiences, and about starting right here in Gainesville at the University of Florida. Love the background, very fitting, and the sweatshirt. So thank you so much for taking your time to be on here today. And yeah, so we're super excited to have you on.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, well, let's just get right in to the start where it began. What brought you to UF?
I have always been a really big sports fan, and I wanted to go to an out-of-state school with a huge sports program. So I grew up in New Jersey. I was one of those weird out-of-state Gators, and I narrowed my choices down to Florida and Michigan, and I made the right choice.
Yep. And I also will say for listeners that maybe don't go to UF, I feel like New Jersey is kind of as represented here as honestly as Florida is. So I think that that's very interesting to explore. But
What
I
you don't know is I'm a trendsetter. When I was there, there were, I think, 4% out-of-state students. And, I think Georgia was and probably still is the largest representative of those students, but there were not that many students from New Jersey when I was in school. I think people just followed my trend.
I love it. I love to see that. So here at UF, you earned a dual bachelor's degree in Spanish linguistics and public relations. So you got also graduated magna cum laude, which is awesome. And you went on to pursue advanced degrees at NYU and at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. So kind of take us through your education journey. Like what made you choose these majors and kind of how did that lead into what you're doing in your career?
So when I came to UF, I didn't know what I wanted to study yet. I was sort of looking at maybe public relations, marketing, different things. I knew that I was going to do a second major in Spanish linguistics or Spanish in general in some form, and I'll get to why. But we used to have a physical book that was probably this thick that we used to have to flip through and see the courses that were involved with each major. And I was looking through one day in a friend's dorm room. We were, freshmen and we're looking at things. And I said, I think public relations would be a really good fit for me. So I chose that, but I was already enrolled as a Spanish major. So I came in, I had applied as a Spanish major. My grandmother is a Spaniard, and it always fascinated me to see how different people from different Spanish speaking backgrounds spoke the language so differently. So I've always been fascinated by it. And I just had this passion for it. So that was sort of my passion project. I did that as a second degree. And so I actually had to apply to the journalism school to transfer from the College of Liberal Arts. Did that, got accepted for the public relations major, and then I had to reapply to finish my second degree in Spanish linguistics. But of course, I was accepted. I think I had maybe two courses left or something. But
I think that's incredible. And what made you choose to pursue another like secondary education? Because I know, especially as someone, I think I'm impartial, but as someone who's in the communications field and wants to go work in it, I know that there's a big debate on, do you pursue that extra master's? Do you kind of work in that? So what is your take on that? And would you kind of encourage students to do that, or what would be your opinion?
so, what I would encourage students not to do is to do things the way I did it because it was a little crazy. So, I know you touched on the fact that I have two different master's degrees. What you may or may not have noticed in the timeline, I don't know if you know the timeline, I actually did those simultaneously while working full time.
Oh,
So don't do that. That would be my advice. It's a little crazy. I am one of those people, I don't sleep. I am always doing too many things at once. And so basically, I started working for CBS television back in 2008. And by 2009, I said, you know what? I like this industry. I think I want to pursue some kind of extra education. PR has been really helpful, but also journalism, like they both fascinate me. So I had applied to NYU because at the time, I don't know what the rankings are now, so forgive me for that, but at the time they were the number one graduate public relations program in the country.
Wow.
And right here in New York, I said, okay, I have to at least apply, right?
Right.
But NYU is famously very expensive and it's very hard to get into, especially when it's ranked the number one graduate program, right? So there was that. And I said, okay, I'm also going to apply to the University of Nebraska for my kind of safety school option. And it was a long story. Basically, my parents and I were discussing things, and they said, why don't you look at the schools we went to? And my father did his undergrad at Brooklyn College. He did his second undergrad degree and his law degree at the University of Houston. My mom did her undergrad at the University of Washington. She's from Seattle and did her master's in Nebraska. So I go through in that order, looking at every school. I'm thinking Brooklyn College is probably going to be the most available option because they're local. They didn't really have a program I liked. I looked at the other schools, they didn't really have anything. And keep in mind, this was 2009 that I'm looking at programs. And of all schools, Nebraska had a distance education broadcast journalism program. So I said, okay, I'm going to apply. That's going to be my safety school. And so I got into both NYU and Nebraska. And I had to then make a decision. Well, which one do I go to? Nebraska is more affordable when you're right out of school, but to get into NYU, I just felt like it was such a good opportunity, such a great program. It was hard to turn down. And there's a longer story with that where I had said to my father, I don't think I could afford it if I did get in. And he said, you're not going to get in anyway. I'll actually bet you your tuition you're not getting in, so don't worry about it. And then I got in, and man of his word, he did actually pay up on that bet.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
CBS did help a little bit with some tuition reimbursement, which was nice because I was a full-time employee. But yeah, I did those simultaneously. So again, students, if you're watching, don't do that. It's a lot of work to do two master's degrees at one time while working a full-time job. But I learned a lot in both programs. And yeah, I think as far as is it necessary to get a master's or two? No, not necessarily. Kind of depends what you're doing and just how much you enjoy a traditional learning environment. How much do you really enjoy that educational setting? For me, I clearly have enjoyed it. I think I kind of reached a point after 4 degrees where I said, okay, I don't think I need any more school. And you can learn in a lot of other environments, which I continue. I always tell everyone, never stop learning. I think that's really, really important.
So I definitely would agree with that consistent, like never stop learning, and also the never sleeping, because I am guilty of that, unfortunately, myself. So, but you know what? I feel like it's great to love what you do, and I feel like it's so much happier when you're like to be awake when you're doing things that you love and things that you're passionate about. And so definitely like to all of our listeners, like pursue the things that make you not really want to go to sleep, that make you want to keep pushing and are excited for the next day. So I definitely want to get into your career. So you talked about how you were working at CBS while going through your master's, but I also know that you have experience at CBS Sports, you have experience at Victoria's Secret, Sports Illustrated. So talk about those experiences. How did you kind of get into, the first part of your career and then start taking it from there?
Sure. So right out of college, it was a recession. I couldn't find a full-time career, and so I continued with my college job working in retail at Victoria's Secret. The Sports Illustrated was actually Sports Illustrated on campus, which I believe no longer exists, and that was considered an internship at UF. I was the communications chair for SIOC. It was a fun program, kind of this grassroots marketing sort of thing, where we got to represent the school in different marketing campaigns and things, and we had different competitions against other schools. It was fun. Um, but yeah, by September of the year that I graduated in 2008, I did start. It was September 8th, right after Labor Day. I believe it was the week after Labor Day, at CBS Television Network in affiliate relations. And I didn't know what affiliate relations was, so I will ask both of you. I'm going to ask you guys a question. Do either of you know what affiliate relations is in broadcast television?
In my experience, I feel like everything in media kind of like I think can be described in so many different ways, but I would say it's like the people that you're partnering with, the people that maybe, for example, like a TV show or something like that. is like, I guess the sponsorships that would be there, the people that are like affiliated with your network, but also not. But I could also be wrong on that. And I'd love to learn.
Sure. So, Rafe, do you want to take a stab or are you in agreement
I,
with Jordan?
I think Jordan summarizes great. I'm assuming it's like, a network, and then how do you connect with those local stations around you?
That's correct. So we have local affiliate stations all over the country, and I serve as a liaison between the CBS television network and the local television stations all around the country. So if you're there in Gainesville and you put on Channel 4, it's WGFL, right? It's owned by Sinclair. So there's different group owners like Sinclair and Nexstar and Gray Media, and they own television stations all over the country, and they have affiliation agreements to carry CBS network programming. So I'm that liaison in the middle. And a lot of people say, well, what does that mean? If they already have the contract in place, what are you actually doing? Well, I do a lot. I work across all different parts of the business, whether it's news, research, entertainment, marketing, sports, legal. You'd be very surprised. It's something different every day, which I think is part of the reason I've stayed so long, is the job is never the same. It's always changing. Think about the fact that I've been there through streaming coming up, and I got to see the start of CBS All Access, which turned into Paramount Plus, and how our affiliate stations have been involved in that piece of the puzzle. So there's just been a lot, but you did mention also that I worked for CBS Sports. That was a part-time kind of nights and weekends role, just separate from my affiliate relations gig, where I did a few different things. I think my favorite part was working in the writer's room with scripts. It
That's
was just a lot of fun. Kind of just marking up scripts in a specific way, maybe answering a question here or there on, like, because I am a big sports fan, they might just be writing a script. Who won that game last week? What was the score? What are they ranked? Things
right.
like that. And then, just getting the scripts to the right people. And that was, just sort of a fun part-time thing when I was overtime eligible. Back in the day, they unfortunately got rid of that. It was fantastic. I remember we had in the writer's room, one TV was just designated for Gator Sports, because when I was there was another guy who ran the teleprompter who graduated from UF in the 80s. And he and I were both Gators, and we would just have this one TV no matter what was going on at CBS Sports that day. We always had a Gator TV. It didn't matter if it was Gator
Love,
softball, Gator golf, whatever it was, we had a Gator TV. So,
love it.
but
So,
yeah, oh, go ahead.
no, 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 please, please.
I was just going to say the way that I work with sports now is obviously very different than that. I'm not on studio or, on set on the studio or anything. Um, what I do with sports varies a lot. Right now, we're in the middle of NFL, right? It's NFL season. So the way these assignments work, you might look at your TV one day and just be like, oh, look, we're airing the Colts game in Gainesville, when Anthony Richardson is starting. You might get that game, and you might just take it for granted that you got that game. You might not know that maybe there was a back and forth where the station was originally assigned a different game, and they reached out and said, hey, Anthony Richardson is playing. We need to see him. He's the hometown hero here in Gainesville. And if the Bucks aren't playing and the Jags aren't playing, then that becomes a game of local interest in the Gainesville market because of that key player. So think about that, but with 200 plus stations. And they all go through me. So
Wow.
I always love to tell Gators that the first time Tim Tebow started a game in the NFL, it was actually a late decision that they made it. And as soon as the news broke, I got a phone call from our CBS owned and operated station in Miami. And they said, oh my God, Liz, we need to see Tebow.
Cool.
And I said, I know, I'm gonna work on it right now. And as soon as we hung up, I got a phone call from the director of sports programming for CBS Sports, and she said, I'm calling you first because you'll know. Should we change the entire state of Florida to the Broncos game? And I said, I already heard from Miami, so yes. And then they sent out an update and said, guess what? Everyone in the state of Florida, you're now assigned to the Broncos game. And every station in the state of Florida pretty much then emailed me immediately and said thank you, because they all knew that I was behind it. Because it
Right.
was just kind of this perfect storm where we had no other Florida teams playing on CBS in that window. And it was just this perfect opportunity for every station in the state to be able to see Tim Tebow make his first NFL start. And so things like that are where you have to have a liaison, right? There's just certain things. I always tell this story because it's not always good stuff. I always tell the story about breaking news. And if you remember a couple of years ago, there were these terrible fires in Maui.
Mm.
And that became national news. Whether you were in Hawaii or not, you were hearing about those unfortunate fires. And you wouldn't just think about the fact that in the national news, we were referencing, or it was Nora O'Donnell at the time on CBS News, she was referencing an upcoming press conference with the governor to talk about what was happening. Well, there's a problem with that. The CBS Evening News is recorded and played back on a delay in Hawaii. So by the time that it would air in Hawaii, they're going to be referencing an upcoming press conference with more information that already happened.
Right.
So now this could put some of the viewers at risk, right? If there's fires and they're being told to evacuate and things, and they
Yeah.
miss that press conference, they might be sitting there saying, oh, let's sit tight. There's going to be a press conference, but it might be too late, right? So
Right.
I remember I was at a Gator happy hour and I remember stepping out to take a phone call. I spoke with CBS News and I said, hey, don't worry, I'm going to get in touch with or it's they're based in Honolulu. So I said, I'm going to get in touch with our Honolulu station and make sure that this doesn't air because this is going to be what the Maui viewers are seeing. And, because once they told me, hey, we're referencing this press conference, I said, okay, this is going to be an issue. I immediately know, all right, we got to kill the evening news on KGMB.
Right.
So I called the general manager. I said, hey, look out for the safety of your viewers. Just kill the evening news, go local tonight. Your local news is so much more important than what's going on. Whatever other stuff is going on in the news today, it can wait because we
Right.
need to look out for the safety of your viewers first and foremost.
Mm.
And she said, thank you so much. And they made sure that we're not in breach of contract, right? I said, no, I know you're contractually obligated to air this program, but obviously this is for greater local importance for your market.
Right.
So things like that, but multiply that by 200 when I have to be on top of what's going on everywhere.
Yeah. That's incredible.
And I know you'd mentioned not a lot of people, understand what affiliate relations really looks like in the day to day. So on a big premier, weekend or sports weekend, what are like 5 people that, you need to be in contact with, whether it's programming, promotions, operations, sales, whatever that may be? And how do you get all of those different local station groups excited for that upcoming weekend?
All right. So actually on the weekend, people need to leave me alone. Uh, but as far as planning, it sort of varies, right? So I don't work in the sales department, thankfully, so I don't have to worry about. I don't usually have to work too much with the sales department or the advertising department. Every now and then, there's something where there's like a specific advertisement that maybe I'm trying to think of one, like if there's a Jack in the Box commercial or something and they don't have that in one part of the country, we might have to talk to them about replacing that on a local level or something. So there's certain things, but that's always done in advance. That's not a hey, it's Saturday and this is happening in this game, and we because if they do that to me on the weekends, I get very, very annoyed. But as far
Right.
as marketing, I do talk with our marketing team. There's different things. Again, it varies every day. It's not like there's a routine of I have to talk to these specific people about this specific thing. Um, but there might be something where maybe there's a local contestant on Survivor that's from the US Virgin Islands, and they need to make sure that they're promoting the appearance in the right times, and they don't understand the way the time zones work in the US Virgin Islands. Or this was a real example where this happened a few years ago and they didn't know, and they said, what time did they air this program in the US Virgin Islands? Because they don't do this and they don't do that, and I had to explain to them, about, how daylight saving time works, and there are certain places that don't observe that. So, like, I have some stations that, part of the year they're the same time as me. And I believe US Virgin Islands is one of them. Forgive me, we'll edit this if they're not. But I believe that the US Virgin Islands was the one, I think they're the same as Puerto Rico, where they are half the year an hour ahead of New York and half the year the same time as New York. But because they're airing the feed live from New York, they have to take it live. They can't move it to, 8 p.m. if it's not airing until 9 p.m. their time. So they would air it, 9 to midnight would be prime time instead of 8 to 11 like it is in New York, but that's only half the year. So when I had to talk to these people in marketing and promotions when they're trying to put these local promos together for the station, I had to explain to them what day the cutoff was of when they would have to switch it by an hour. And it's there's lots of different things. So I mean, as far as big sports weekends, I mostly am in contact with our CBS sports programming department, of course, and with the local stations themselves. The local stations are the ones I talk to more than anyone else. There's certain things like we might have like a big thing with entertainment if there's going to be a game leading right into the Emmys or something, and we have to plan for, okay, what happens in the event of an overrun. We have our plan at the network, and we'll send out the contingency plans. We have sports procedures that go out every week that say, hey, if this runs to this time, here's what we're doing, and if this stops at this time, this, or we'll cancel this show that night, or there's different contingency plans in place. But really it's more about making sure that every station in every time zone is prepared for what they're going to be doing. And certain ones, again, I mentioned daylight saving time, which is coming up in a few weeks. Do you guys know the two states that don't observe daylight saving time?
Oh, that recently I
I'm quizzing you guys.
Um,
I can guess. I can guess right now. I'm like for some reason I think it's Colorado and like California, but I could be wrong.
no, I feel like California would. I'm gonna say Texas. I don't know.
Arizona and Hawaii.
Oh, okay.
We should have known
So
Hawaii.
I should have been like Hawaii and Alaska. Like, hello? Like, what was I doing in Texas?
yeah, so it's interesting because Arizona is technically in mountain time, so they air on a mountain time zone schedule. So I just actually yesterday I reached out to them again to make sure we're going to be moving them to the right feeds for when the time changes again in November. But they have these interesting things because when they are on a West Coast time,
Right.
but they're following a mountain time zone schedule, there's certain things where they reach out to me, can we change our schedule to this thing that's just exclusive to us? And I'm usually just like, sure, do whatever you want. Because it doesn't really make a difference for the things they want to do. But there's just a lot of moving pieces and a lot of things that you don't think about. So our primetime schedule, for the most part, I mean, of course, there's some live specials that do air live across the board, but for the most part, our traditional primetime schedule is recorded and played back, right? So it's recorded, well, for mountain time zone stations anyway, but it's not like a live event. So, we'll have NCIS is a show that is recorded and it's being fed to them live at 8 o'clock, but it's not happening live. The live sports and even the recorded sports are fed out totally differently. So if you're in New York and LA and you're watching primetime stuff, right? And you have the neighborhood starting at 8 p.m. on a Monday, primetime is 8 to 11 on the East Coast and 8 to 11 on the West Coast. So obviously they're 3 hours apart. So if I call my friend in LA and I say, hey, are you watching the neighborhood? If I call at 8 p.m., they're gonna be like, what are you talking about? We're in local programming, it's 5 p.m. Right?
Right.
But 3 hours later at 8 o'clock, they get that same feed.
Wow.
But sports are totally different. So sports, everything is fed out live. Even if it's a recorded Pro Bowl writing from 3 days earlier, it's gonna air if it's at noon on a Sunday, That's going to air noon Eastern on a Sunday and 9 a.m. Pacific time. So I can call my friend in LA, hey, are you watching this pro bull riding? And they'd say yes.
Right.
Um, so it's a little bit interesting because if you think about local scheduling, which most people don't unless you're in my business, um, think about, you hear Saturday morning cartoons, right? And we have certain obligations with the FCC of certain kids programs or EI, educational informational programs that we need to air. And they're usually scheduled on a Saturday morning. So if you have a show that's airing on the network Saturday at noon, and the station has a kids program scheduled the same time, they have to move that. So
Wow.
it is my job to figure out where they're moving that because
Yep.
you're not going to have picture in picture, right? You're not going to have a Sale GP sports spectacular or college basketball game or something airing picture in picture with, what do we have, like Mission Unstoppable or whatever it is. So there's a lot of little things like that. And then think about, someone like Hawaii, their programming, they have to move their programs all the time. They have CBS Saturday morning and CBS Sunday morning scheduled at 5 a.m. Hawaii time. There are so many weeks where they have to move that back to 4 a.m. because of our network schedule.
Right.
And that's my job to figure that out every week.
There are so many complexities to that,
Everything. So yeah, when I say I'm working across every group, it's a lot. And then I mentioned legal, right? I said these people all have affiliation agreements. Those are contracts. And I have to make sure that all of our stations are in compliance with our contracts. And that when they want to preempt something, right? If we have a station that wants to air a local pregame or something, if say we're airing an Ohio State game on
Right.
CBS now that we have Big Ten instead of SEC. Don't get me started. But if, our station in Columbus, say they get excited, we're airing an Ohio State game and they say, we really want to air a local pregame show over this sports spectacular that you're airing before the football game. They have a certain number of hours that they are allowed to preempt to air that locally within certain terms of their agreement. So it's my job to make sure that they're in compliance with all of their requests. And every contract is different based on the group owner, based on the market, based on just different things that are grandfathered in based on previous owners. And there's a lot of moving pieces. And I'm sure you guys have seen just the way that local sports have expanded on broadcast recently. There's a lot more local sports packages going out to these local stations, particularly with Gray Media. Shout out Gray. They love to pick up local sports packages and air those locally on the broadcast networks. And they have to then work with me within the terms of their contracts. And there's a lot of moving pieces to figure out what they can and cannot do every time.
And so we can tell how passionate you are about CBS. You joined them right out of UF. You started as a coordinator all the way into a senior manager.
I started as an assistant, actually, an administrative assistant.
There you go. So what skills do you think got you promoted at each jump? I know you've talked about, putting your head down, hoodie on, and grinding, and always working 24/7. But what does greatness look like in your roles?
So I think one of the skills is just curiosity. I don't know if you'd call that a skill, but that's one of my traits that's definitely helped. I am one of those people, I always want to learn more about how all the pieces come together. How does everything work together? Why are we working with these people? Why does this matter? What is this impact? What are the consequences? So I would always go around to everyone, what do you need help with? How can I help with this? How can I help with that? And actually, early on in my career, I sort of became the unofficial number 2 on events in my department and just was working on events because I found it interesting. And that has nothing to do with the live TV aspect. But then, I got an up close look at how we would seat people at we used to have an affiliates meeting and there was a luncheon that went with it. We'd have 300 people at this lunch. You'd have people from my department, which my department's not that big, but then you'd have people from other parts of the company, you'd have on-air talent, you'd have group owners that own stations, you'd have people from the local stations that would come in. And we'd sit there and kind of look at things, and you'd really get this overview of what's going on at the network, what are the priorities. So we'd have the CEO of the company there, and we'd say, okay, well, what show are we really trying to promote right now? Okay, well, we need the talent from that show. If they're going to be at the lunch, they need to be there. Which affiliates do we have major renewals coming up with that we want them to have FaceTime with our CEO so they know that they matter to us? And what big sports events are coming up? Okay, well, we have the general manager from the Augusta television station, and we have the Masters coming up. So maybe we put some CBS sports executives and some CBS sports talent with our general manager from Augusta and with some other people from their group owner, to that they can talk and they can figure out different opportunities. And so that kind of helped me see the business. So that's, I don't know if that's a skill, but that definitely helped me learn. As far as skills, one that's really helped is storytelling, which I've definitely improved that at UF. And public relations is such a great place to learn about storytelling and how to frame a story, right? You learn just how to, I mean, I hate the word spin, but how to put the best spin on it and how to, get what's the right angle. You always learn that when you're learning to write a story, to tell a story. You want to hook, right? You want to draw somebody in. That's ultimately how you engage with your audience, how you communicate with how you relate to your publics, right? So you want to make sure you're finding the best angle, the best way to communicate, and overall communication skills are so important, and being clear and just communicating the correct information, being accurate is really important. But as far as stories and framing, I love to tell this story. I just told this story when I was speaking at UF last month with a bunch of students at the J School. We always have to make sure we're looking out for our best interest, but also the best interest of the station. Now, years ago, the show Face the Nation used to be one single half hour, and it was put into everyone's contract. Was Bob Schieffer at the time. They all had to air the show. At one point, they expanded it, and it was formatted as two separate half hours. And because we already had all these existing contracts and people had their own local schedules, we couldn't just mandate, okay, now this is an hour. But as contracts started to be renewed, this got worked into many, and most of our stations now air it as a full hour. Although with the caveat that on the West Coast, a lot of times it's impacted by NFL Today, and the second half hour that can stand alone does air overnight or on a delay in those markets. But one of our markets didn't air the show at all, the second half hour, and that was Beaumont, Texas. And they called me one day after years of us trying to get them on. So we had a bunch of different reorgs in my department where 3 different men had worked with this station, and they all tried and they couldn't get this show on the air. It was just completely unavailable in Beaumont, Texas. And one day, one of their programming people called me. He said, Liz, I'm getting killed with phone calls. We keep missing pro bull riding, and it's so big in Texas. And what can I do? And I said, well, what do you mean? You guys are preempting that because you have your local religious programming. And I said, you guys are welcome to, kill that contract and put our programming on the air. And he said, well, we can't do that. And I said, okay, well, let's think about this. And so I said, let me call you back. And so I called a coworker of mine, the last one who had tried to get this on the air. And I said, do you mind if I take a stab at it? I said, I know they're technically your client right now, but I said, I have relationships with them and I have an idea. And he said, if you can get this done, sure. He said, but Liz, it's not gonna happen. I said, okay. I said, I just want to make sure I'm not stepping on your toes. He said, no, go ahead. So I called him back and I said, hey, if you guys can put Face the Nation the second half hour overnight, I will allow you to air the first half hour of pro bull riding that you keep missing live on your CW station. And they said, wait, really? Now, mind you, that's also a win for us because we want the exposure for our pro bull riding, but it's all about framing it so that it's a win for them, right? So now they're like, oh my God, we're not going to get all these viewer phone calls anymore. This is fantastic. We can just put a scroll on the bottom of the screen that says, turn to our CW station, catch the first half hour of the show, which is a win for us at the network already. But then on top of that, we're going to get that second half hour of Face the Nation overnight. So I call them up, and within 10 minutes, I get a note from their general manager. This is fantastic. Please write up an amendment to our contract. We're ready to sign. We want this in place right away. And so I said, okay. And I called my coworker and I said, done deal. And he said, how did you get that done so quickly? We have all tried for years. And I said then what I say to this day, and no offense, Rafe, but never send three men to do a woman's job. So I I got that done
I
very
love
quickly
that.
because yeah, I just knew how to tell the right story, and I made it a win for all of us. I got everyone on board, and they still air it now to this day. They air Face the Nation too, so that's now in their contract. So we have that clearance, which helps news, helps sports, and helps the station.
I
Right. So
And talking about the broader industry in general, I know you mentioned it a little earlier with the rise of streaming and how that is changing the industry. So, what is your kind of how does this work when you're in this type of industry that is so fast moving? How is that changing what you do daily in your job and with your line of work?
so it's interesting. Every broadcaster handles streaming a little bit differently. For us, we bring in the affiliates, right? So we have different contracts in place so that if you have, YouTube TV or Fubo or whichever streaming service, you can get your local CBS affiliate on that streaming service. And so that's all part of contracts that I can't get, too deep into, but that is part of contracts that we put in place with them. So there's different fees and things involved that of course I can't discuss, but there's that. But then there's also the other piece that we at Paramount have our own streaming service of Paramount Plus, right? And there's different tiers of Paramount Plus. And on some, on the higher tiers, so some viewers can get the local television station. Some do not, except for NFL, because that's, a different animal entirely. The NFL contract is way above my pay grade, but that, you're going to get your local stations game and their feed and their local commercials, right? So it's been really interesting to see how all of this has evolved and expanded. But then there's the other piece that complicates my life because there's all the cord cutters, the cord nevers, that if you never had a traditional MVPD and you just have streaming services and that's all you're doing, and you have to think there's so many of those people that are cord cutters or cord nevers. There's so many people that aren't getting traditional cable, and we have our contracts with the group owners, but the group owners also have their own contracts with distributors, and so they have certain fees and things involved with the number of subscribers. So when subscribers are going down for traditional cable networks, they are getting less money. And then when they have to pay the network, they're complaining, well, we don't have as many subscribers. And this is, all public. This is on every earnings call of every group owner that you ever can listen to. They talk about this, how, it's changed a lot because the more the subscriber counts go down, the harder it is for them to pay us. But we have these contracts in place, and ultimately we are providing great value to them, right? We have the NFL, which makes them a lot of money. We have the best of the primetime programming. We have amazing programs like all the NCIS franchise shows and 60 Minutes and, the popular Survivor and Big Brother and Amazing Race, all the, reality stuff. We have all these amazing programs. We have the NCAA tournament and the Final Four and the national championship, where everybody got to see how amazing the Gators are, and the Gators got to make our station money, which was great, and I got to talk about that. Um, but yeah, it's definitely interesting to be in the business now, to see all the streaming stuff, and then the other part of the business that's been crazy is mergers and acquisitions, which the name of the game is consolidation, right? Everybody, when I started here, I don't even remember how many group owners we had, but I would guess it was easily more than double what we have now. So we used to have some stations that, we'd have one group owner had one station. And so imagine those lunches that I talked about with 300 people, we'd invite people from all the group owners. If I look back at those lists of attendees and where they were from, a lot of those group owners either don't exist anymore or don't have CBS affiliates anymore because they sold them. So that's really been an interesting piece. Like right now, you may have seen the announcement that Nexstar is looking to buy Tegna. So I handle affiliates for both Nexstar and Tegna. Well, it won't change my day to day all that much unless their contracts change. But for all of them, yeah, their day to day stays the same, that they still contact me. But their day to day might change because they're going to be owned by Nexstar rather than Tegna. But it's really interesting. I know you didn't ask about the M&A, but we are talking about trends in streaming, and that's a big trend right
No,
now.
but I think it's very applicable because there's so many students who want to go into this industry and it's so rapidly changing. So I always like to highlight that when we have people on in the entertainment space because it's looking so different. Like we had Ari Luxembourg on and he was like it just even from the legal side has changed so
Oh yeah.
much. And when legal starts changing, it's like okay, like those processes have been there forever. So now it's like we had a Ben Chase who's a director of the name, image, and likeness (NIL) here at UF, and he says it's just changing so rapidly. So I like to highlight that for students, and I appreciate you bringing light to that.
Yeah, I mean, we just very publicly were taken over 2 months ago. I think it
Right.
was August 7th. Skydance officially closed. So now my company, if I put on my work Zoom background, it says Paramount, a Skydance corporation. And things are changing very, very quickly. So, we now have to adapt to how they do business, and we're still figuring out what that means. There's been a lot in the trades about it. Obviously, we've been hiring a lot of people. Some people have been let go. We very publicly just had a voluntary severance package option, and we're dealing with the aftermath of that. And they tell us that starting in 2026, it's going to look a lot different at our company. So we're all kind of just holding on for dear life, and we're going to see what that means for all of us. But
Wow. I mean, like looking back over your very dynamic career, I feel like you've had such an opportunity to become like a master in affiliate relations, but also through all of these different experiences, like you said, your days never look the same, like year
never.
to year, it's never the same. You're always consistently kind of honing your skills and also getting new ones, which is really exciting. So for anyone that's listening that might want to go into this line of work in affiliate relations and communications in this way, or even someone that wants to go into a career where they're consistently learning and being able to be creative, what is one piece of advice that has stuck with you throughout your time? Like one maybe major lesson that you've learned from this experience that you can give to our audience?
Never be afraid to ask, because if you don't ask, it's already a no. So if there's something you want to learn about, go ahead and ask. If you want to shadow someone, if you're in a job and you say, hey, I really want to learn about finance, can I shadow one of the accountants for a day? Ask. The worst they can say is no.
True, very true. I think that's a great place to wrap up. Do you have anything exciting that you're working on right now? Anything like what does the next few months look like for you?
The next few months are trying to figure out how my department moves forward with the new changes, if we're going to have any impactful changes. We're still kind of figuring that out. The next few months, of course, we're still in NFL season, so it's dealing with stations and what they request and things. And there's all kinds of moving pieces. And I will share, so I run our internship program for my department. And I had an intern, she just wrapped with me last week. But every year I ask my intern, what is your major area of interest? What do you want to learn about? And it's always different. And this year was sports. She's like, I'm a huge sports fan. I want to know about sports. And I will share with you, she goes to the University of Houston. So I obviously had to torture her a bit this summer. But so she is remote in Houston right now, but she's also an Astros fan. One thing you may not know about me from my LinkedIn is I am a lifelong Seattle Mariners fan. I mentioned my mom was from Seattle. She went to the University of Washington.
Yes.
Lifelong Mariners fan. They're in the
Mm.
playoffs. I'm going to knock on wood. Hopefully that's still true after tonight. But the Mariners have a long history of disappointment. You may not know, I mean, both of you were probably not even alive the last time that they won the AL West. It was 24 years ago. It was 2001. They won the AL West, and that was the last year that the Mariners had won a home playoff game in MLB. They finally broke a drought in 2022 and made the playoffs, but they, beat the Blue Jays in the wild card and then lost. But anyway, usually people expect the Astros to win the AL West, and they did not make the playoffs this year. So I got the chance to torture my intern a little bit, but I, of course, always make it relevant to work. So we had this crazy situation last weekend when Tampa Bay, the Bucks, if either of you are a Bucks fan, played at Seattle at the Seahawks. So if you saw the game, you probably don't even know all the stuff that was going on behind the scenes. That was almost a complete disaster because the Mariners made the playoffs. So both teams were at home the same day. In Seattle, the city of Seattle has a mandate that games cannot start less than 90 minutes apart, because if you've ever been to Seattle, you know the stadiums are right next to each other. So they have to start at least 90 minutes apart. So we have to talk to our people at Fox, which we don't work for Fox. We don't have Major League Baseball. Everybody kept saying to me, what do you mean the Mariners are driving you crazy? You guys don't have MLB. And I had to keep explaining this to people. Well, if the Mariners end up playing in the afternoon, like if they're going to put the Mariners on at 1 p.m. local time, well, the Seahawks game is starting at 1:05 local time. So that's not really going to work. And they might have to move the Seahawks game by an hour or so, one way or the other. They were going to have to move it. I think they were saying it was going to be 1:30, a Mariners game. They were saying, well, then we have to move the Seahawks game back an hour if they do that. Eventually, Fox agreed to just put the Mariners in prime time and avoid this whole problem. But where might this be a problem? Well, any station that was assigned to the Seahawks game, I had to tell them kind of, you're on standby. I don't know yet what time your game is going to be because my Mariners made the playoffs. And they're all like, congrats to your team. This is crazy. What do you mean it might change? It might change, it might not. I don't know. I'll let you know. But then we also had stations that were requesting that game, right? Because I mentioned we have stations that request different games. So Tallahassee called me and said, we really want the Bucks. We don't get the Bucks that often. They're actually playing well. Can we get that game? And I said, well, maybe. It kind of depends, because if they have to move the game, they're going to want to keep the audience smaller because they're going to have to isolate stations. It just gets a little chaotic. Eventually, I was able to tell them, yes, we're going to put you on that game no matter what, but stand by. I don't know what time it's going to be. But then think about how that impacts other home markets. So this is all what I had to teach my intern. She wanted to learn about sports. And I said, this is sports in the business. So the Carolina Panthers their market, Charlotte, was impacted, sort of. They ended up not being because the game wasn't changed. But so Charlotte, North Carolina, of all stations, you're like, that doesn't have anything to do with Tampa Bay or Seattle. I had to call up Charlotte and explain this whole thing to them and say, hey, the Panthers are playing at home on Fox in the early window, so we have to put you in the late window. So we currently assign you to this game, but we might have to move you to Tennessee, Arizona to keep you on the right schedule. But TBD, I'll let you know. And so it was a whole bunch of moving pieces. And these are the kinds of things that if you're just a student, You're not thinking about, okay, the Mariners made the playoffs, so Charlotte, North Carolina might have to watch Tennessee, Arizona that day. But that's the kind of thing where there's this domino effect. And I said something about me is I always look at the consequences and how one thing impacts the other. And I think that's something that's kept me really eager and involved. So as far as what's coming up the next few months, more of that kind of stuff. Hopefully, more of the Mariners winning if they can, beat Detroit tonight. Um, and then what else is coming up? I mean, we have Premiere Week, right? All our shows are kind of staggered. They've sort of moved the premieres a little bit later. It used to be September, now it's more into October. So we've got that all coming up. So watch all the amazing shows that are coming up on CBS. And, obviously, basketball season on a personal level. College basketball season's coming up soon, and thankfully the Gators will be playing in New York in December. So very excited about that. And on a personal level, just all the stuff that I do with the UF Alumni Association, both at the national level with the board of directors, and here locally as president of the Gotham Gator Club. So that'll keep me more than busy the next few months with that and all the changes at work. So
Well, that's amazing. I feel like you were just honestly such a gator to look up to because I mean,
thank
even
you.
you're wearing the Florida, the background, like I have to shout it out. But I mean, from being in the alumni board and the Gotham Gator Club, and even throughout, I feel like all of your stories and experiences, you kept tying things back. You're like, well, I was actually at a Gator Club meeting and when I found out this, or I was at this or that. And I think it's just so cool to see how you've taken your time at UF and the lessons that you learned and built this beautiful and dynamic and really exciting career. Like I feel like this is something that definitely interests me and I know will definitely interest a lot of our audience to understand how it works behind the scenes. That it's not we do take it for granted. We take it for granted how easy it is for us to just see this game, but it was perfectly curated exactly for these viewers. And I think that that's such a beautiful thing. So thank you so much for taking the time to be on the episode
You're
today and being
welcome.
on Comcast. And to end all of our episodes, we always do, of course, a Gator Chomp.
All right.
All right, ready? Three, two, one. Go Gators. It's actually our
Okay,
first
go
Zoom.
Gators.